This Force 13's regional AU channel with the latest on the flood emergency in some parts of Victoria. And a special thank you to John Townsend, who was in Wangaratta a couple of days ago. And John has given me permission to show his video footage and a couple of images. And sadly, it's not good news. However, we'll start this update with the latest from the Victorian Premier and other emergency services heads.
Thanks very much for joining us here at the State Control Centre. The Minister and I are joined by, of course, Andrew and Chris, Tim Weebush from EMV and SES respectively, and Assistant Commissioner David Clayton from Victoria Police joins us today as well, and I'll throw to David in just a moment. Obviously this very significant flood event continues to unfold. Whilst we've had a reprieve from rain, waters are rising, peaks are being reached, houses are being inundated and communities are being isolated because of these floodwaters. There are a number of updates I want to give you, things that have happened, things that are underway, and then we'll talk about what the community needs to do, the requests that are being made, and some of the choices that people can make to keep themselves safe, and of course keep our emergency services safe. So if I can just go through a number of different points. We have 14 relief centres that are open now. Details of those, addresses of those are on the website. We've got 10 choppers that are up in the air providing both assessment of damage, but also moving people around, moving cargo around to support those affected communities. There are now 55 sandbag collection points that are open across the state. We have a number of ADF requests that are on foot, and I want to thank our partners in the Australian Defence Force, who, for the first time in I think it is genuinely a first. We've had a number of local ADF personnel, particularly supporting communities in central Victoria and northern Victoria, coming out of barracks in the northeast. And I met some of those yesterday, and I just want to thank them for their commitment and for their hard work. We'd expect there'll be 50 or 60 additional ADF experts, if you like, so specialists, who will come and support us in coming days. That's separate, of course, to some of the support we'll need around clean-up and important repair work, but we'll keep you updated on those requests. But that system is working well, and for that support already provided, we're very grateful, and of course that will grow over time. I spoke with the Prime Minister this morning, and he again reiterated the National Government's support for our efforts now, and indeed clean-up and recovery beyond that. The ADF is one part of that, but I thought I would thank them for their extraordinary work to this point. While I'm thanking people, there are literally thousands of SES volunteers and paid staff. All of our emergency services are out there doing amazing work, and I thank each and every one of them, and I thank their families. This is such an impressive thing to see so many people working so hard to keep others safe, and of course those who might not necessarily wear a uniform, who are looking out for each other, providing support and assistance. Thank you so very much. Also, people following advice is the other really important way in which people can contribute to the safety, not just to their own safety, but the safety of others also. And I'm sure that our emergency services heads here will have a moment. We'll talk about that in just a moment. I wanted to mention roads. We currently have 344 roads that are closed. That number changes hourly. Major roads are assessed twice per day. There is a number of urgent repair works that have already started. A number of contractors on our big build who we have reached out to provide us with some temporary support to do some significant repair work. That work has already started. Obviously we have to get assessments completed first, see water subside, and then we can get in and do urgent repairs. We may have to go back and redo that work at a later point, but on major arterials, major roads, key roads for local communities, getting them open is the priority. Expense will not be an issue there. We will spend what needs to be spent, in order to make sure that communities can be joined up, can be connected as quickly as possible. In terms of emergency payments, some 3,000 Victorians have made important applications for those payments. I again remind anybody who's out of their home because of these floodwaters, emergency payments.dffh.vic.gov.au, or if internet is an issue for you, 1800 226 226. As I said, 3,000 of those applications have been made, and we will process those payments as fast as we possibly can. That works out just over $2,000 for impacted families, and it's about helping them with somewhere to stay, clothing, food, medicine, all of those basics that are critically important at a very difficult time for them. That support means a lot. We remain in a situation where we have some 500 homes that we know of. In fact, it's 466, so the estimates that were made yesterday about 500 homes with above the floorboards, above the floor flooding. 500, it's actually turned out to be 466, and we think there are still about 500 properties that are isolated, not flooded, but isolated. Those numbers will change. Almost certainly those numbers will grow as we see floodwaters peak in a number of communities, the details of which I'll leave to others to go through today. Just in terms of a couple of other matters, I'm very pleased. Yesterday I wrote to the banks and asked them to take urgent steps to defer or waive, wherever appropriate, mortgage payments and other payments for flood affected families and indeed businesses. And I'm very pleased to see a positive response. From those bank CEOs. That's a really important thing that we can do to take some pressure off people. If you know that those payments are not going to have to be made for a little while, then that obviously takes a little bit of pressure off at a very difficult time. So I thank them for their partnership and for their prompt response to the letter that I sent to them yesterday. Just finally, of course, it is my sad duty to have to confirm that a 71-year-old man has been found deceased in the backyard of his property in Rochester. We of course send our deepest sympathies to his family and friends. Rochester is a proud local community, a very tight local community, and they'll all be, I know, saddened to hear of one of their number passing away. I just make the point, we'll stand with that family and all families affected by this, but it just brings home for all of us that this is serious, this is potentially very, very dangerous, and our sympathies are with that family. And hopefully that sends a broader message of just how serious this is, and that's why we're all working as hard as we possibly can to make sure that people are safe. Just finally from me on Mickleham, we continue our discussions with the federal government. They are all unfolding well. We think that we'll have places for around 250 people for multiple weeks, and to that end we have already begun the process of recruiting the necessary staff, between 80 and 100 staff that would be required to support those 250 people, and we will continue to update you on that. Again, and I just said, and finally, but if I could just do one more before I hand over to David, I just want to send a really important thank you out to all of those volunteer groups, all of those charities and others that are supporting people in very difficult circumstances. I know Sikh Volunteers Australia, who can always be found very, very quickly whenever there is difficult times upon any community. They're already out, I think, in Seymour and indeed Benalla. The Victorian Council of Churches are providing support and care, and of course the Red Cross, who we can always count on to be there in times of difficulty. Can I just, on behalf of all Victorians, thank all of those different groups for their compassion, for their care, for their hard work. That makes a real difference to so many Victorians. Now to take us through just some whole range of issues that Victoria Police have been attending to, most notably the number of rescues that have had to be undertaken over the last 24 hours. I'll hand over to Assistant Commissioner Clayton, but I will, before I do that, just again make the point, please do not drive into floodwater. Please, if you are asked to evacuate, heed that advice. I know it's very difficult, I know it's very challenging, but your safety is our number one concern, and indeed the safety of those who may have to come and rescue you. That has got to be our number one concern, and will be throughout this event. On our throw to Assistant Commissioner Clayton.
Thank you, Premier. I can report that emergency services agencies have responded to over 350 rescues during this flood event. Of those rescues, more than 200 have been to homes, 150 to people driving through floodwaters, and 10 to capsized tinnies. In relation to evacuation warnings, our message is to ask you to heed that warning and to evacuate. The consequences of not heeding the warning have been seen in some areas where we've responded to those homes that were asked to evacuate and we've had to rescue people. In terms of driving through flooded waters, there are many roads that are closed and we ask you not to drive through those roads. It's not a time to go four-wheel driving and sightseeing. We're here to help, and I just want to talk you through what a rescue looks like. So a standard rescue in a boat has a crew of 3 skilled operators who will respond to a rescue. If it's a swiftwater rescue, we have 8 personnel involved in every rescue who are highly skilled technically and trained to a high level, but they are difficult and dangerous rescues that sometimes, most often, can be avoided. A rescue involving a helicopter has 4 operators: a pilot, a winch operator, a person who will go down the winch, and also a flight operator. Often that can be a perilous activity given the weather conditions and the environment they're trying to rescue somebody from. We've seen examples where we've rescued people from vehicles where they should not have entered that swift moving water. We've had a rescue of a truck driver in really difficult circumstances where there were power lines and those operators were at peril because somebody chose to drive through floodwaters. So we would ask you to make sure you drive to the conditions and heed the warnings that are provided. Police remain in areas that are evacuated to ensure that there is no looting. We have no reports of looting and there will be zero tolerance to any looting. We anticipate that in coming days we're going to see some of the largest evacuations that we have ever seen. So please heed those warnings and evacuate when you're asked to. Thank you.
Good morning everybody, Tim Weebush from Vic SES. I'm going to cover off on what our flood risks are over the coming days, starting in the west of the state. So the Yarra River is currently at major flood level at 5 metres around Glenorchy, and that is just below what we saw as the record flood in January 2011. That flood water will move downstream early next week, and on Monday at Horsham we will see low end major flooding at around 3.7 metres. Then if we go across to the Avoca catchment, today we're expecting to see major flood warning to occur around Charlton. An evacuation warning was issued for Charlton yesterday, and again we can't emphasise enough that when we issue an evacuation warning, that is serious. We are asking people to leave and not stay in their homes. We're expecting levels just below what we saw in 2010, which is below the record flood of 2011. Then if we go across to the Campaspe, on the Campaspe River last night we saw at Rochester at peak at 115.7 AHD. That's 300 millimetres above the record flood of January 2011. Sadly, last night, as you've just heard from Assistant Commissioner Clayton, we had 160 rescues in and around Rochester for people that had chosen to stay and not leave despite the evacuation warnings. We're going to see further evacuation warnings on the Campaspe River at Echuca later today and into Sunday. Again, for the community at Echuca, you need to be ready and preparing to evacuate in parts of Echuca. Also for Echuca there will be a second peak, and that will be coming from the Murray River, and that will be mid to late next week. So for Echuca residents, the first peak is later today into Sunday from the Campaspe River, and then the Murray River midweek to the end of the week. If we go around to the Goulburn River, as we've seen at Seymour, we saw that record peak of 8.26 metres. That has fallen yesterday to 7.4 metres. Goulburn Valley water are now releasing further inflows out of the Ilden Dam, and that will see the major flood level go back up to around about 7.5 metres and will sustain at that level for a couple of days. But we're certainly not expecting it to go anywhere near what the peak was at 8.26 metres. That floodwater though is moving downstream, and there's evacuation warnings now in place for Murchison. Murchison has already started to reach the major flood level and will continue to peak over the next 24 hours. The water then moves from there down to Orvale and Kyalla West, where major flooding is expected to start today and through the weekend. And then that floodwater will reach Shepparton on the Goulburn, but join up with the flooding that's been occurring on the Broken River and Severn and Castles Creek. With those three rivers combining, we're expecting to see a flood height of around 12 metres between Shepparton and Mooroopna, commencing around lunchtime today and moving to a peak on Tuesday. Again, an evacuation warning is out for Mooroopna, Shepparton, Kyalla and also Murchison right now. Now is the time to leave. We're going to see flood levels on the Goulburn where it meets at Shepparton with the Broken and Severn Castles Creek that is equivalent to 1974. These are record flood levels. And over the coming days, all of this water is going to continue to move towards the Murray River. If we go around then to the Ovens and King, which combine at Wangaratta. At Wangaratta, we're expecting a peak this morning of 12.8 metres. An evacuation message is out for a part of Wangaratta around what is called the Parfitt Road levee. At the moment, we've had geotechs out there this morning checking that levee. It is structurally sound, people are safe, but again, if you're behind that levee, the message at the moment is to be out of that area until those floodwaters start to subside. At Mount Emu Creek, good news in the southwest of the state at Skipton, where we've seen that flood peak occur. There has been inundation of some properties in and around the township of Skipton, but it is now receding. On the Barwon River, we're seeing the convergence of the Lee and the Barwon Rivers at Geelong. We're expecting moderate flood levels just below major, which means our sporting grounds there, caravan parks and some properties, around a dozen, will be impacted by floodwaters into this weekend. And then finally, across the metropolitan area, the Maribyrnong River has now dropped just below minor flood level. The evacuation warning was lifted this morning with a safe to return message now current. There is a community meeting for Maribyrnong residents at 12 o'clock today where you can get information on relief and recovery services, but also some of the safe to return actions that you can take. On the Werribee River, we're expecting minor flooding to continue for another couple of days into early next week. And finally, on the Yarra River, we're seeing moderate flooding in the upper reaches from Yarra Glen through to Coldstream, and again that is likely to continue at that level for a couple of days. As these floodwaters do start to recede, you will start to see those evacuation messages removed and a safe to return message replacing it. When you see those messages, that is where you need to think about what you will need to do before you can go back into your property. If your property has seen floodwaters inside, you need to be checking your gas and electrical services by a professional. So be thinking about and working through who that might be now. We're advising people to make sure you're wearing strong boots and gloves. Don't go back there in basic footwear and other clothing. Be prepared for the conditions that you might find your property. And again, 1800 226 226 is the Victorian hotline for any services that you may need to access information from, whether it's flood warnings through to relief and to recovery. I'm now going to pass over to Commissioner Chris to round us out.
Thanks very much, Tim. Good morning, everyone. Our emergency services and our key partners, we are so focused on keeping Victorians safe, whether that's in the response phase as these rivers peak, or where now people have moved to relief centres and might be in those centres for a number of days. So we are very, very focused on what that looks like and how we do that. We've talked about what the weather has been over the last few days, and we've touched on what the weather might look like in the coming week. Some of that is firming up at this stage, so in effect what we will see now over the next few days is fairly stable weather. But once we move into Wednesday, it looks as though we will see another low pressure system start to impact on the east coast of Australia, but more New South Wales and into Victoria. It will draw down on that tropical moisture. So into Wednesday night, we could see falls in the northwest, maybe moving into central Victoria around that sort of 2 to 10 mil. There could be some storm activity, and we could see some heavier falls around 20 mil. As we move into Thursday, we could see rainfall increasing, so sort of 5 to 10 mil as it moves across into central Victoria and touching on the northeast. And we could see in that storm activity localised falls up to 20 to 30 mil. When we move into Friday, it's moving more across to the northeast, and on those northeastern ranges, we could see rainfall up to 50 mil. So on the top of what we've already got, we are very focused on what that means for us, and we're doing that modelling at the moment. So this is early days, and that will firm up over the next few days, but it is so important for us to continue to focus our thinking and our planning, and we're very much doing that. We know with the scenario that's been described by the various speakers, it's about what the Murray will look like, and then what we will see something similar to 2010-11 with that sort of slow moving flood situation.